Good afternoon, Florida. Welcome to Webinar Wednesday. We're here today with IPDA's strategic priorities from the state to the classroom. Normally at this time, June Rawl would welcome everyone, but she's unable to speak with us today, but do want to remind you and give her recognition that none of this is possible without her diligent effort, hard work, and support. My name is Brian Bush. I'm an assistant director at Atlantic Technical College and Broward County Public Schools, and I'm very excited to be able to share what we've put together for you this afternoon. As we go through today's presentation, I will try and monitor the question and answer section. If you do have questions, please go ahead and enter those questions into the Q&A, and I will answer them as we go at strategic stopping points. And for any questions that we miss, we will go back and review and make sure that we tidy those up before we end the session for today. Make sure that you're trying to put those questions into the Q&A and not into the chat, because I'll be monitoring the Q&A a little bit more closely. You will be muted, so that'll be the only way that you can communicate with me today. So our target outcomes for today's session: knowing the Florida Department of Education's 4 strategic priorities for adult education. I really love these things because it gives us an opportunity to sort of, preach to the choir. The people that join and participate in these Wednesday webinars are really those folks that are always constantly going above and beyond. So I have a feeling that you're all very familiar with these 4 strategic priorities already. What we also want to look at is what is the rationale and purpose for these strategic priorities? Why do we identify and bring these 4 forward? And then really the big idea, learning how to shift program and instructional delivery to meet those priorities through operational policy. But we know that we have a lot of people here that feel like their class or their program may not be one of the official identified IET programs. And, we're really not sure, because I'm not part of that official IET program, how do I, bring these into my classroom? So really trying to break these down into how we can bring them into every single classroom through common instructional practice. And then the final thing that we hope you get out of today's webinar is to receive some planning tools that'll help sharpen your everyday focus and approach to conduct class with a sense of urgency geared towards equitable student outcomes, closing achievement gaps, and maximizing full participation in the state's workforce at a highly skilled level. So at this time, we're going to launch a poll. I would love if you were able to rate your knowledge of the state's strategic priorities for AGE and your ability to support them in classrooms without sweeping operational changes on a school-wide level. So that could range from no knowledge of the priorities all the way to strong knowledge and no ability to implement them in a classroom to strong ability. Okay, so what we want to do first is we want to look at Florida's vision for adult learners and putting adult learners first. As we break down this statement, and you can read the statement for yourself, and I'm sure many of you have already seen this statement, vision of Florida's adult education system is to place learners at the center and deliver outcomes that promote full participation in the workforce, result in high quality credentials of value, and close equity and achievement gaps. So the first part of this that I want to highlight is putting learners at the center. So everything that we're going to talk about with these strategic priorities is geared towards the learner outcomes, student-centered environment. So that's going to be a shift for some of us. The next point is to deliver outcomes that promote full participation in the workforce, result in high quality credentials of value. I just want to, that's a shift for us as well, because oftentimes we have students and they come in and they enter into our programs and, what did you come here for? What brought you through the door? I'm here to get my high school diploma. I'm here to learn English. It's really up to us to uncover and unveil the real reason that's brought them to our programs, which is the ability to see maybe further than they would anticipate otherwise. When we look at full participation in the workforce, one of the conversations that comes up often is when we look at ESOL, and I've heard many people say, well, our ESOL students aren't here for jobs. They aren't here for that type of training. They have a professional career in their home countries. But what we're looking at now is getting them those credentials to be able to tap back into those skills and their talent set in order for them to participate fully. So, part of this is also not discounting what the potential is for that student group. And then final part is close equity and achievement gaps. Everyone should be getting the same opportunities. And sometimes equity is really about, they're not going to get the same opportunities because those that need more, according to equity, will get more. And if anyone should be getting additional, it is those students that have the most difficulty participating, the most difficulty getting to our programs based on the zip codes and areas that they live, and really trying to give them additional supports because they're going to need additional supports to be successful in working through some of the things that we want to provide for them so that they can have a student outcome that brings them in alignment with the opportunities that exist for all the other students that maybe have more advantages setting into it. So the strategic vision will require a combination of new innovations and the support of thousands of individuals, leading to increased numbers of adults with, and this is basically our checklist, higher levels of literacy, higher levels of numeracy, higher levels of digital literacy, industry recognized credentials, post-secondary certifications, and degrees. And then ultimately leading to high demand, high skill, high pay employment. So now we'll go ahead and get into the strategic priorities and how they're worded and try and break those down towards what the demands are of the priorities and then what that might look like in a classroom of somebody who doesn't necessarily have the authority to make sweeping operational changes within your school setting. So strategic priority number one, promote regional partnerships to ensure comprehensive approaches that result in improved learner outcomes. So what does that mean? Basically, how are we tying services together, braiding funding and resources, and figuring out what it is that our students need and how we bring them those opportunities. And some of these partnerships could include the adult education provider in your region, teaming with the post-secondary program or partner in your region. And then as a classroom teacher, reaching out a little bit further and seeing what other type of community organizations are out there supporting adult ed opportunities, working with the websites and different chambers of commerce in your region to connect with businesses. As a classroom teacher, I can't tell you how excited your local workforce development board from CareerSource would be if you reached out to them, introduced yourself, talked about the program that you're teaching, and asked about ways that you could provide more opportunities or the things that you could be covering in your classroom, and strengthen these things even on an individual class-to-class basis. The Florida Department of Economic Opportunity is going to have the Florida Regional Demand Occupation List and a bunch of other valuable resources that you have access to in the web. As we get towards the end of this webinar, as you download the PDF at the end of this, those tools and those links are there for you, so you don't have to go searching for them. You'll be able to go directly to some of those resources and tap into those as a teacher. So looking at this a little bit more closely, according to the language of the state, the demands of priority one are a full spectrum of services, which includes transition to post-secondary and employment, braiding funding and resources. We know that these students need more, and so we have to figure out ways to provide more as these institutions. So how do we work together and make sure that we're not duplicating services and things like that? Communicating issues and best practices, conducting a local needs assessment and identifying credentials of value, inclusive strategic planning, respond jointly to funding opportunities, and uniting through adversity. And most of these are programmatically and operational, exactly where teachers feel they may not be able to contribute independently. But how do we translate these where they are going to be applicable, and where a classroom teacher is going to be able to begin to work towards some of these on their own? Uh, Begin with focusing on learning outcomes. We know that adult general education needs to be delivered with a sense of urgency. Contact your local agencies, your career source workforce development board, introduce yourself, contact your post-secondary partners and employers through phone calls, visits, websites, talk about your students, ask about their needs, try and create reciprocal relationships where you're able to offer them and they're able to offer you something. And then in your classroom, contextualizing classroom to student interests related to successful outcomes, high skill, high wage, high demand employment via continuing education and career pathways. Uh, Basically, what this means is bringing the finish line closer by incorporating some of those shortcuts to their future goals. It's not about just the adult general education. We're trying to make them go further and go faster. And the only way to do that, just like if it was an approved IET program, is consolidating and blending some of our current short-term goals with some contextualization that relates to their long-term goals. And then, having an idea that there's no wrong door and multiple exit ramps. Inform of opportunities and the steps that they need to take to get onto the pathways that are available in your district. That means you need to be informed, but this needs to be a constant reminder for the students, so that they understand no matter where they went to initiate services, that they are going to have the same opportunities as other students that may have started at a different institution, resource, school. It's kind of look at it like if somebody asked you to run as far as you can and then run as fast as you can, how far do you think you would go? And that's a tough one, because if I'm going to run as fast as I can and I don't know how far, I'm probably going to give up after about 10 feet. But if you tell me I need you to run as fast as you can or try as hard as you can up until this point or up until that mark, then you can kind of tap into your reserve a little bit. You can run a little harder, because you understand that this is the point that I'm trying to get to. And then when I get to that point, I can recollect myself, and I can run as far or try as hard as I can to the next point. And that's kind of the way we're looking at these career pathways and these multiple exit ramps. These are opportunities for your students to have collected some type of tangible student outcome that they can use to inject themselves into the workforce with a credential that's going to command a higher rate of pay, that's going to make them more resilient to changes in the workforce, but also have an opportunity to continue their educational pathway and stack further credentials, and resources on top of that will continue to escalate their job trajectory moving forward. Moving on to strategic priority number 2. And this is a real big one to focus on: expand the state's talent pipeline through attainment of credentials of value and acquisition of post-secondary certifications, industry recognized credentials, and degrees. So again, some of these things may feel like the demands are outside of your control if you're on the classroom level, but we want to give you some strategies of how to approach these. The priority number 2: demands of agencies. Alignment of adult programs to high wage credentials of value to make Florida #1 in workforce education by 2030. drive career pathways through integrated education and training between partners, design post-secondary transition programs with state and technical colleges that lead to larger numbers of adult learners accessing and completing post-secondary education and training programs, and provide robust participant supports. So how do we make this realistic and tangible in every single classroom? The first thing is all classrooms should be considered transition programs. These approaches and this vision doesn't stop with officially approved IET programs. This vision and this approach is being implemented because the idea is that it brings the students what they need. It's what's best for students. It eliminates the equity gaps that are out there and the opportunities for the members of our community that are currently occupying low skill, low wage jobs. And we want to bring them up, and it's what's better for them, but it's also better for our workforce needs throughout the state. So, end goal driven through a series of progressive short-term goals. Again, we get the running analogy. If you invite me to come with you to run a marathon on Saturday, I'm not going. And that's sometimes what our AGE programs look like if we're talking about transitioning and completing a post-secondary program. It sounds and seems like a monster endeavor. And what we need to try and do is understand how we can make that seem more like a 5K race. If you invite me to a charity 5K, I might participate. I might be able to complete that 3-mile run with you much faster willingly than I would be able to do that 26-mile. It's not going to seem as daunting when you present it that way. Clearly defined, attainable, and communicated pathways to success. Career focused through a single or differentiated approach to contextualized instruction. This could be in health science, is probably the most popular, has the most approved IET programs of study right now. But it may be, you may not have a room full of students in some of your entry-level AGE programs that all want the same career cluster. So when we talk about a differentiated approach or a single approach, we're talking about what specific career skills and what career clusters are you bringing into your AGE classrooms that are going to make students feel like they are simultaneously addressing their long-term and short-term goals at the same time. So that may include incorporating some health science content through your reading and numeracy on one day, and it may include going to a business or IT approach. It may include incorporating some HVAC, electricity, or carpentry and other tech trades. It's really going to vary class to class based on knowing your students, knowing what their needs are, and knowing what their career goals are, so that you can begin to contextualize some of that instruction. We learned from the Regional Educational Laboratory in some of their webinars last year on program retention and student persistence, and those are still available to you on the IPDAY website. Cost-benefit analysis is a big motivator for students persisting and continuing to work through these. Repetition and robust supports. The repetition, let's say we did a cost-benefit analysis of all our AG students at intake. It's never in education going to be a set it and forget it and leave it alone. Oh, we covered that, so we don't have to come back to it. Repetition is going to need to be a consistent driving force in our students persisting. Think of it as in we went to Universal Studios and you wanted to ride one of these roller coasters, and you're with somebody that deathly afraid of riding a roller coaster, and you're trying to encourage them, you're trying to talk them into going with you. They're not sure they can do it. They don't feel like they can do it. You can see you're piquing their interest a little bit. You get them in line with you. Well, every minute that they're standing in line, there's something inside of them that's saying they can't do it. It's too hard. It's too long. I'm not going to be able to make it. And a lot of times that's exactly how our AGE students feel when they look at this daunting road in front of them and they're imagining the possibilities of what they can do and what they can complete and what they can continue to persist with while they also juggle their adult responsibilities of jobs, families, and the other demands that are on their lives. So in those moments, it's not that you did a cost benefit analysis at intake. It's not that you encouraged them one time of what the potential is and reviewed what the career pathways were and discussed how they could make it. The same way that you're going to have to look at your friend and encourage them the entire time they're in line until they get onto that roller coaster and make sure that they believe they can do it because of repetition, repetition, repetition. That's the same way that we have to approach some of these practices with our students, because we know that they have doubts and those second thoughts in their mind that are going to pull them away from these things. And we really want them to be able to persist and continue with them. So all of the approaches that we're talking about today, it's not a one and done. You're going to have to continue to repeat and continue these supports. The next thing that I'd like to share is something that we do with the teachers here at ATC, our AGE teachers. It's a planning tool. And on this planning tool, what we do is we ask our teachers to incorporate some of the philosophies that are going to create urgency in the classroom, some of the things that are going to create opportunities for them to infuse employability skills, and seamlessly and simultaneously look at students' short-term and long-term goals. And I know this is probably hard to see through the PowerPoint, but this has also been uploaded to the IPDA website as a tool that you can download and utilize or modify so that it meets your needs. And you can see, just as the heading and the entry point, some of the things that we look at is your AGE content area and the learning standard that you're addressing, what employability target you're going to look at through this lesson, and then what your objective is. What is the hoped for outcome of doing this assignment, and the student learning goal statement. So when you're looking at these, it begins to give you a good opportunity to practice, having that academic language numeracy goal and then marrying that with an employability target with every single lesson. And one of the things that we had to work through is when we began to do this with our ESOL teachers, and we talked about employability skills, and in the frameworks that employability skills are listed in the specific career fields, and you can go to the DOE website and download those and look at them. And we know they're wide and varied, from collaboration to critical thinking to time management. We could go on all day, and IPDA has webinars specifically on teaching employability skills and how to infuse those into our lessons. But our ESOL teachers really wanted to target communication. And every lesson that we were getting, the employability target was communication, and while it was valid and while it was important, trying to diversify those and deliver those based on what the students' needs are, looking at what the students are bringing into the classroom and trying to come up with some pre-assessments to determine what those students really need. That's where your partnerships and conversations are going to really help out when you're communicating with businesses. What do you find that your employees are starting with and that they're lacking? So it's not, developing communication with every single lesson, but really trying to not only figure out where my students are ahead of time, identify which are the most important to focus on, and then having some type of criteria to determine whether or not they've been successful as they've worked through those things. So again, what prerequisite knowledge or skills do the students need to be successful within that lesson? And as you ask those questions, it helps you align, what are these prerequisite knowledge and skills that they need? And then the second logical approach to that is, do they have that prerequisite knowledge? Because your starting point may actually be in a different point than you think it is. And how will you assess where they are with that? How will you know for sure? And we talk a little bit about assessment up here with strategic priority number 3, and we'll come back to this. But assessment being very, very important. A lot of people like to fall back on their CASAS scores to be their form of assessment and knowing, but there's some flaws with that, so we'll talk about that a little bit as we move along. How will you differentiate instruction to support students at various entry levels and make the learning target accessible to them? This isn't going to be whole group instruction all the time. How are you going to help reduce some of those achievement gaps? What academic or technical vocabulary will students need to comprehend related to the standards? How will you differentiate instruction to allow for remediation and enrichment in the above areas? We know that every adult education teacher is a multi-level teacher. So you're going to have students that are going to need extra help. You're going to have students that enter into the lessons and they're already proficient. So how are you delivering it in a way that's meeting everybody's needs, and we're valuing their time? It's being delivered with a sense of urgency. We look at the I do, we do, you do model, really encouraging the teachers to spend more and more time in the you do model, because that's going to show us where the students are, and it's going to let us know who needs what type of interventions. How will you check for understanding through the lesson? And more importantly, how will the students check for understanding? How do the students know how they're doing? Do the students know what the academic goal is? And more importantly, or equally importantly, do they know what the employability goal is? Many times you'll devise an activity that will incorporate multiple employability skills, but really trying to approach this in a targeted manner, like taking one dart and throwing it at the bullseye of a dartboard. This is the employability target for this lesson, and this is what I want you to focus on, and this is what success is going to look like, as opposed to, this lesson, they work together, they collaborate, so they've got teamwork, it's got a deadline, so there's time management built in, they've got to think critically about the content. By the time you're done, you're supporting the development of 6 or 7 employability skills, which is all a great and wonderful thing, but how do the students know whether they've been successful with those, or whether they're progressing with those? And it's much more effective to have one targeted skill with that seamlessly written goal, so that the students know if they're progressing and learning, rather than taking a bucket of darts and flinging it at the wall and hoping some of the darts stick, which is sometimes what happens and isn't very effective. Finally, continuing on workforce preparation, what instructional strategies, projects, activities, assignments will you use to allow students a chance to practice one or more employability skills? We know that development of skills is something that's done through practicing. You're not going to develop employability skills by taking notes. Right now, nobody is developing any employability skills by participating in this webinar, just like riding a bike. I learned to ride a bike by getting on a bike and trying to pedal, and by falling down. And when I fall down, I realize the errors that I've made, and I adjust, and I make some small changes, and I try again, and I probably fall down again, and I fall down again, and I fall down again. But by continuing to provide opportunities for them to practice through the activities and things that you're having them do in the classroom, that's how they're going to develop these skills. And then just a final note, just, part of that lesson planning, list any resources you plan to use in that lesson. So, do we expect and require our teachers to fill this out with every single lesson that they deliver in the classroom? And we don't, but we do require that they are ready to answer those questions, that they're thinking about these things as they're entering the lessons, and then that they're spending their lesson planning time having conversations with colleagues that revolve around these topics and subject matter, because we think this is really how we make our classrooms more seamless, more contextualized, and more geared towards not only workforce development, but transition into those programs. And also being intentional and transparent with the students about what our goals are. It's not enough for me to have a goal. I've got to communicate that with the students. I've got to communicate to the students so they share that goal, and so that they can also measure their progress on that goal. Okay, so moving on to strategic priority number 3, ensure all learners receive high quality instruction that prioritizes measurable labor market needs and outcomes while working to eliminate equity and achievement gaps. So what does this priority demand? Responsiveness to adult learners, especially working adults. Here's the rub in adult ed for a long time now. We are ultra flexible. We try and offer classes during the day, at night, online, on Saturdays. And really, if a student can attend at all, some attendance, some participation is better than none. But at the same time, if we're preparing them for the workforce and we're preparing them for post-secondary opportunities, we've got to try and find a balance of doing so with some rigorous urgency. They're not going to continue to have that sort of flexibility when they enter into their post-secondary or career and technical programs. They're not going to have that type of flexibility when they enter into their careers. We know that we want to encourage their persistence and we want to keep them motivated. But sometimes it's about finding that balance of knowing what's best for me versus what is convenient for me. We've had that challenge where students want to participate in our online programs because they don't have to pay for gas, especially now with where gas prices have gone. They don't have to sit in traffic. They don't have to worry about childcare. But if that's the type of student that needs to be in an in-person classroom because it helps employability skill development because you can participate in more robust classroom activities, trying to get them to understand the difference between what's convenient versus what's best for me. It's just like being at a restaurant and you want to order dessert, but is dessert what's best for you? Oftentimes we yield and bend to what we want in this moment and not what's best for us long term. So continuing to diplomatically try and be the guiding force in those students' lives so that they can understand that sometimes our recommendations and sometimes where we are asking them to make sacrifices is coming from a long-term viewpoint and approach, and encouraging that. And of course, we want to value and honor the sacrifices they're making, even to participate a little bit. But go ahead and continuing to try and find that tipping point of getting everything we can out of every single student. No matter how much urgency we bring into the scenario and the situation, it's still going to be dependent on what they are able to contribute and what they're providing towards that effort. Um, Continue, as we've talked about several times, providing students with workforce skills, high standards for teaching and learning, advanced higher education, generational economic stability, online and digital learning with supports for students and instructors, focus equally and intentionally on services and opportunities for the child and adults to help break the cycle of poverty. Again, these are the demands run by the state. So let's look like what that looks like in the classroom. Focus on student learning with frequent formative assessment and learning scales related to multiple targets. So those of you that ever worked in K-12, or if you haven't worked in K-12, a lot of student field trips. And even if you do an adult student field trip, the most important thing, don't lose any students. You got to come back with everyone that you left with. So if the most important thing is making sure we have everybody, what do you do on a field trip? You take attendance. And because it's the most important thing, how often do you take attendance? Well, you take attendance in the morning when you get on the bus, you take attendance when you get it to the rest stop, you take attendance when you get to the destination, you take attendance when you're leaving the destination, you take attendance when you're at the rest stop again, probably all the way back until when you get to back to where you started, you take attendance again. So in one field trip, if the most important thing is taking attendance, we do it 6 times. In our classrooms, the most important thing is formative assessment. So we should be conducting formative assessment as often and as frequently as possible. It can be informal. It could be through projects. It could be through exit tickets. There's a tremendous webinar from a few weeks back on formative assessment in adult general education classrooms that I encourage you to take. But what I would also put forward is if we ask how you know how your students are progressing towards their goals, or how your students know they're progressing towards their goals, and the answer relates to their CASAS score reports, I would encourage to try and find more frequent ways to build informal assessment into that classroom so that you can have checkpoints where you are able to intervene as you go. Looking at the CASA score report is definitely valuable and beneficial. But I would look at that like if you're in a restaurant and the customer has the soup. Well, at that point, there's nothing you can do with the soup. It's that might as well be a summative assessment because the customer already has it. If you're in the kitchen and you're tasting it and you're trying it, you can add this, you can add that, you can apply interventions to try and help at that point, and that's really what we're trying to do with formative assessment. Even though you're not quote unquote an officially approved IET program, you can still design a single set of learning objectives in every single classroom. You can incorporate employability skills. You're already incorporating those AGE frameworks, and you can incorporate specific career skills and terminology based on what those students are conveying that they're interested in. And one way to get started on that is a planning tool that we provided today. Measure success by outcomes of all students, and all means all. So, not presuming anything that may or may not be occurring in your classroom and the classrooms throughout the state. But I have witnessed that in adult ed, and maybe it's because we don't issue grades, we don't have progress reports. I have seen a tendency to spend a lot of time in the I do and we do portion of the gradual release model, whole group discussions, and the way that teachers will gauge whether, are you eating what I'm serving? Is what I'm putting down being picked up? Are the students learning what I'm trying to reach? Is being determined by the choral response of the highest performing students in the classroom. So I'll lecture for a little bit. I'll ask some probing questions, and I have some frequent over participants who get all the questions right. So then as a teacher, I can say, well, I guess I did a great job on that lesson because all the students picked up and were able to answer, the assessment check questions that I gave out. But are you really providing some type of assessment tool or measurement where you can check on the students that aren't participating in those conversations, that are happy to let the same student answer all the questions because then they're off the hook on having to answer the questions themselves? Sometimes we'll say to a class, "Are there any questions?" Or worse, "Is there anybody that doesn't understand?" And those lead to under participation every single time. Even if I don't understand, or even if I do have questions when posed or phrased that way, I'm probably not going to openly divulge that information in front of my classmates where I'm trying to protect my pride. So, is it through exit tickets? Is it through writing samples? Is it through write your response before you answer orally so that the teacher can then go around and circulate the back of the classroom, the students that aren't answering and participating in the conversation, look over their shoulders, look what they're writing, and try and figure out, okay, are they also learning? Are they also picking up what I'm putting down? And then as I approach my interventions, I can more appropriately differentiate for those students that need a little bit extra, that need a little remediation. And then I can also appropriately group my students that are performing at a high level so that I provide them some enrichment opportunities rather than boring them through, a repetition or a rehash of what they were already able to pick up the first time through. So very, very critical basic andragogy stuff. But really important to make sure that we are doing it on a consistent and regular basis, because we know that when the students feel like they're not having their needs met in the classroom, either because they're not learning or because we're reviewing things that they already know and they've already learned, that's going to lead to a lack of persistence rather than a continuance of it. Finally, maintaining and promoting a growth mindset in all things, especially digital literacy. I can't tell you how many times I've heard people tell me that students can't do that on a computer. They can barely use a mouse. And you got to wonder, how true that is, because in response to the pandemic, our students have shown us that they can do all sorts of amazing things using technology, and oftentimes even better than we can. So, preparing adult students for success in a digital world, even if it is one of those cases where it's a student that struggles with those sorts of things, it's our responsibility, according to our framework, according to WIOA, according to our vision and mission of doing what's best for students. They are preparing for careers in a digital world, and we need to build that digital literacy within them. And sometimes that means that we need to be able to take chances and build that digital literacy within ourselves and within our own programs, and not put up barriers. Sorry for the typo there. Not put up barriers that wouldn't exist otherwise, and the students, and not limit the potential of our expectations. And that brings us to strategic priority number 4. And again, those of us that are in this webinar right now that aren't determining the trajectory of our program in our districts, really are kind of looking at this and saying, well, I don't know how that applies to me. What can I do about that in the classroom? Incent, measure, and support enhance program effectiveness. And we could take accountability for what that looks like in our classrooms. On a state level, the priority demands and places particular emphasis on the critical role of qualitative and quantitative data, and how they drive continuous improvement. So they're talking about on a state level, but that doesn't mean on a classroom level that we can't also look at qualitative and quantitative data to drive our own improvement of our own classrooms. But the state is committed to developing a comprehensive program performance monitoring system that will ensure reporting, data analysis, and continuous improvement practices to support learner and program outcomes. So as a teacher, what data can I look at also to support learner and program outcomes? So first of all, know your own quantitative data and be reflective to your instructional practices, lesson plans, and conditions for learning. Take chances. Don't get stuck with this works. This works, so this is what I'm going to do. Well, I've taught this lesson 12 times over the last 12 years, and it's worked, and my students have made progress and they've learned, so I don't want to do anything different. It's not about doing something that works. It's about taking chances and finding what works best. We're being tasked and challenged with finding ways to get better learner outcomes more quickly, get our students to go further and get them to go faster. That's a double whammy. John Hattie came out with a study, and many of you probably are aware. There were 252 influences on student achievement and measured their effect sizes. So, I mean, all sorts of different things that are going on in students' lives, some of them educationally, some of them not. But basically, anyone that's participating in an educational program with these influences, what is the effect size of that influence on their achievement? Out of the 252, less than 10 had a negative impact on student achievement. Now, they had a different effect size. Some of those influences led to more student achievement than others. But basically, no matter what you're doing, if a student's participating, they're learning. So when we take this idea of this works, so I want to keep doing it. Well, sure, it works. Almost anything you do works because the students are participating in an educational program. But you really have to be willing to take chances, change what you're doing, implement new things, not because what you were doing didn't work, but there may be something out there that works better. There may be something out there that's more responsive to the changing needs of our students and the changing needs of our state and the changing direction of where we're going in adult general education. So, you really have to liberate yourself and be willing to take chances, because that's really the only way that we lead to some improvement. When I say gather qualitative data, the next bullet point, what do we mean by qualitative data? Survey your students, know what they're interested in, know what they like. You can respond to that better with your daily lesson planning. but also find out why they left. Gather some qualitative data for students that didn't come back, and for what reasons, and reach out to them. Find out what they're looking for in a classroom ahead of time. Find out if you're meeting their needs. Ask them when they left. Delivering surveys will give you a ton of qualitative data and information that you can use to incorporate into your lessons. Um, Obviously, it's not about the numbers, it's about the outcomes. Teaching every single student they're as important as we know that they are, and making sure that they know it, that we don't keep it to ourselves. It brings us to the next bullet point: retention over recruitment. So a lot of times, if our numbers get low, we begin having conversations about how do we enroll more students? How do we make sure that they know that we're here, what we're providing, what the opportunities are? How do we market to them? Let's put a banner on the fence on the highway. Let's get a billboard. Let's get a radio ad. And really looking at your retention numbers. How many students make it to a post test? How many students make it to 10 hours in your program? How many students leave because the program is not meeting their needs? And when that does occur, where was that shortcoming and how are we responding to it? And finally, know your students, know their goals, devise measuring sticks to track progress towards achievement. So I don't want to speak for all men, but a lot of us really love cutting the lawn. We love to cut the grass, and probably people wonder why. And the reason is because afterwards we can sit on the porch and we can look at our lawn and we could just enjoy the efforts of our hard work, and we could see our achievement, and we could immediate gratification of what that looks like, because you can tell as soon as you cut the lawn. Education does not work that way. It's like watching the grass grow or watching water boil. Progress is slow and painful, and it's not only for us. You just keep watering the plant every single day, and you have faith that you're going to get there. But the students feel the same way. You go to the gym, you work out every day, every day, every day. If I go to the gym today and I work out for 6 hours, I'm not going to see a change. You've got to have faith and dedication that that consistency is going to lead to results. How do we get the students to hold that same faith and same determination and same consistency that's going to lead to those results? And often devising these checkpoints, these assessment measures, and abilities for them also to track their own progress, because sometimes we take it for granted that they're intuitively in sync with what we're delivering. But if we're not intentional about sharing what the programmatic goals are, sharing what the lesson goals are, sharing what success is going to look like on X, Y, and Z, then they may not be picking it up, or they may not be making the connection and the link how this activity develops this skill and fits into where I am on this career pathway, which we have repeated and shared over and over again, so that those dots are connecting and firing more rapidly in the students' minds as well as ours. Which brings us, to this little growth mindset slide. And I know, again, the font is probably real small, but when you download the PDF, you'll have this, and you can refer back to it. The big overarching questions, I'm hoping that you heard one thing or two things that you can take and implement out of today's webinar. Hopefully that makes the hour worthwhile. I'm sure that some of it also works as affirmation. Oh yeah, we're doing that. Yep, our program does that, and you're kind of checking those boxes as you go and feeling like, okay, we're in the same place. This is good. This is a good affirmation of what we're doing. But that's up to you to decide and to identify where are those growth opportunities for you in your classroom and in your programs, and do the processes and infrastructure that you have in place help students dream bigger and set loftier goals. I think we can all think back to a moment in time where we had somebody that really saw more potential in us than we saw in ourselves, and when they shared and conveyed that with us, it got us to take some chances and maybe imagine things for ourselves that we didn't see for ourselves prior. So are you creating those lighting those sparks and flames within your students with the processes and infrastructures that you have in place? Do those supports help students realize their full potential and take preparatory steps to work on their immediate goals, but also their long-term goals simultaneously. Remember, when they enter your programs, they sometimes don't have long-term goals. They just have that immediate goal. The storm in their lives prevent them from seeing past the obstacle that's right in front of their face. So you want to talk about what's next? I don't know what's next. I'm just trying to get over this hurdle. I'm just trying to get a paycheck. I'm not worried about a high paying job right now. I just need a paying job. So, taking on the initiative to make sure that you're developing and working towards both those short-term and long-term goals simultaneously. Do your programs and supports close achievement and employment gaps for the students that face the biggest obstacles? Are you constantly assessing all of your students and providing feedback regarding their progress towards those standards and their progress towards meeting those employability skills development? It's not enough just to practice it. They have to know what success looks like. They need some type of marker so that they know whether they're making progress. Then based on the reflection, changing the mindset of those stakeholders. Where are you going to get some of these things in place? Where are you going to change the mindset of the students? Taking actions, eliminating excuses like our students don't want that, or our students can't do that. Our students can barely use a mouse. Excuses paralyze action. When I have an excuse or a reason that something can't be done, well, then I get to do the easiest thing in the world, change nothing. And what we really want to do is take ownership for these, take on the challenge and rise to the challenge and meet those needs. But it starts with eliminating barriers and not being the barriers ourselves. And then how are you going to get there? Continue to log in, continue to participate in these Wednesday webinars, continue to be a part of the overachieving group. Use the resources that we give to you. There's a lesson planning tool. I've got a few more hot links in here on the PDF that you can click on. When you download this PDF, these are all links that are active. We've got an assessing student progress toolkit from the IPDA webinar a few weeks ago about adult student assessment. We've got a link to the IPDA IET resource page, and again, viewing every single classroom like it's an IET transition classroom, whether it's an officially approved IET or not. The tenants that are bringing what's best for students into those classrooms are the same tenants that you want to bring into your own classroom. Moving IET awareness for beginners to contextualize application in any program. That's another one of the most recent IPDA webinars that will address and touch on many of the points that we brought forward today. How do you develop a single set of learning objectives in IET? Again, trying to bring some of these tenets into your own classroom. There's some value in watching that and bringing those tools. Digital literacy and distance learning. And IPDA Career Pathway Institute sign up free. So these are all the IPDA resources that can help bring some of today's training to reality in your individual classrooms. And then some other outside resources. We've got a link to the Career Source Local Workforce Development Board contact list based on regions, the Florida Regional Demand Occupation List. We also have a link to the Florida Monthly Employment Data Release, a theoretical framework for 2-generational models, which gets into family literacy, and Florida Department of Education Adult Education Career Pathways and Integrated Education and Training. That brings us to the Q&A. I don't see any questions in the Q&A. I do see a couple in the chat, just a couple introductions here, and I should have had you guys ask for you to introduce yourselves. I appreciate those of you that did. That was nice to connect. But I don't see any questions. If you do have any questions, go ahead and pop those into the Q&A, and I will address those as we move into the next portion. And we sincerely appreciate your attendance, your participation, all that you're doing for your students in the state of Florida and in your programs. What we're going to do now is we're going to ask for a few more seconds of your time so that you can complete a poll for us. and answer these questions. It'll help some of the information that we need on our effectiveness and continue to improve. Give us some qualitative data like we were talking about. While you're doing that, I want to draw your attention to next week's webinar. It's going to take a village, and I think you can infer what that is about. And we know it sure is going to take a village, and the state of Florida recognizes that and appreciates all that you're doing. And that's all that we have for today. Thanks for joining us. But that will bring us to the end of strategic priorities from the state to the classroom. And we look forward to seeing you again next time. Take care, everyone.